What happens when the government decides to redefine wasteful spending, and how does that redefinition profoundly reshape the organizations serving our communities? Welcome to the deep dive. We cut through the noise, get straight to what you need to know, basically giving you a shortcut to being truly well informed. Today, we're plunging into President Donald J. Trump's recent actions concerning federal grants and what he's calling, well, improper lobbying. This isn't just abstract policy stuff, it's a direct look at how your tax dollars are spent and how, countless nonprofits operate, delivering vital services across the nation, even abroad sometimes. Our mission today: unpack the August 28, 2025 presidential memorandum and its really wide-reaching implications. At the heart of the administration's argument is this claim. They contend taxpayer funds are being improperly diverted to political lobbying. They're calling it wasteful, abusive, and potentially fraudulent.
Right. And what's really striking here is the speed, the directness of the administration's response. Attorney General Pam Bondi has now been tasked with a pretty critical investigation, looking into whether federal grant funds are being illegally used for lobbying. And she has a report due back within 180 days. This directive follows a significant temporary pause that was placed on various federal financial assistance programs earlier this year. These aren't minor tweaks at all. They represent a fundamental shift, really, designed to halt what the administration views as grant money with, well, highly political overtones. They've pointed to specific examples like programs for transgender boys or certain racial justice initiatives, calling them problematic.
Okay, let's unpack this drive for accountability a bit more. President Trump's stated goal seems clear enough: increase the integrity of federal grant-making, and specifically prevent its diversion to political lobbying activities, unquote. The administration views using federal grants for political advocacy as not just wasteful, but potentially abusive, fraudulent, and a serious legal concern. It seems built on a core principle in federal law, right? Specifically 31 U.S.C. 1352, which, put simply, strictly limits using grant funds for lobbying. The idea is that those funds should truly benefit the general public, not, private political agendas.
That's exactly right. And if you connect this to the bigger picture, it's really about a fundamental realignment of federal spending, aligning it with what the administration sees as its core priorities. They are explicitly looking to eliminate what they term wokeness and social engineering policies. And this isn't just talk. It's backed by those specific examples they've called out. For instance, there was that National Institutes of Health grant, the NIH grant, adapting an LGBTQ plus teen pregnancy prevention program for transgender boys. Another one they cited was a U.S. National Science Foundation grant focused on advancing racial justice in elementary math. The administration's argument here, essentially, is that these policies divert resources away from what they see as more immediate, tangible issues impacting everyday Americans, redirecting them towards, well, ideological or identity-based projects that, in their view, don't deliver practical, universal improvements.
And it's interesting how this redefinition of wasteful spending isn't just domestic, right? We've also seen them target international initiatives. Republicans have pointed to allegations of taxpayer dollars funding projects like a transgender comic book in Peru and millions for Sesame Street in Iraq. They've labeled these as a radical agenda and a clear waste of government resources. There were even claims, I recall, some funds were used to influence foreign governments, maybe for regime change in Hungary. It really paints a picture of a very wide-ranging effort to scrutinize where the money's going.
Absolutely. So if we zoom out a bit, what's the bigger picture here? Beyond just these individual cases, the overarching aim seems to be to enhance accountability in federal spending, aligning it with administration priorities. This includes stopping the use of federal resources for what they describe as Marxist equity, transgenderism, and Green New Deal social engineering policies. Arguing these don't genuinely improve citizens' daily lives, it's a really concerted effort to shift the focus of federal funding.
Okay, so let's walk through the timeline of how these policies actually rolled out, starting right from Inauguration Day. January 20, 2025, President Trump issued several executive orders. One was ending radical and wasteful government DEI programs and preferencing, that's diversity, equity, and inclusion, and another called defending women from gender ideology extremism and restoring biological truth to the federal government. Pretty direct titles. Then, just a week later, January 27th, OMB Acting Director Matthew J. Vaith, that's the Office of Management and Budget, the White House's budget arm, he issued Memorandum M2513, and this mandated that temporary pause on various federal financial assistance programs, grants, loans, effective the very next day, January 28th.
Right. And that pause specifically targeted areas like foreign aid, NGOs, non-governmental organizations, DEI initiatives, woke gender ideology, and the Green New Deal.
Yeah.
All of these were put under immediate scrutiny. This all sort of culminated in President Trump's August 28th presidential memorandum. That's the one formally directing Attorney General Pam Bondi to conduct that full investigation into illegal lobbying with grant funds. Agencies are now required to assign a senior political appointee to oversee financial assistance. They have to meticulously review and modify funding announcements and even cancel awards that conflict with administration priorities, as long as it's legally permissible. It's a very comprehensive, very aggressive effort to reshape how federal money flows.
So, with the administration taking such a strong stance against specific uses of grant money, it naturally brings us to the broader, often, well, contentious topic of lobbying itself. How do conservatives generally view this activity? Many conservatives actually view lobbying as, a natural extension of freedom of speech, a fundamental constitutional right to petition the government. They tend to see it less as a nefarious activity and more as advocacy, education, or simply providing input on specialist topics. It's often considered maybe a necessary evil because it allows different groups to pool resources and effectively communicate their concerns, their unique expertise, to representatives who, let's face it, can't be experts on every single topic.
That's right. The real tightrope for conservatives often isn't whether lobbying should exist, but how to make sure it serves the public good. It doesn't become a way for private profit at taxpayer expense. It's about drawing that incredibly fine line where advocacy might tiptoe up to the line of corruption. This concern comes up when individuals or politicians seem to enrich themselves, maybe through cushy post office jobs or big speaking fees from industries they used to regulate. Edwin J. Fulner of the Heritage Foundation, he's openly criticized K Street conservatives, referring to the Washington, D.C. lobbyists, criticized them for using government to turn a profit, which he argues fuels increased government spending through things like earmarks.
And he had a pretty striking example of that, didn't he? Yeah, he cited a lawyer earning $90,000 to secure a $3.5 million earmark for a sports complex in Culpeper County, Virginia. Now, just for clarity, earmarks are the specific funding allocations added to legislation, often requested by individual members of Congress for projects back home. That's a huge return on investment for the lawyer, sure, but it's the taxpayer footing the bill for a local project that might not be a national priority. Or think about the Army Corps of Engineers in Louisiana. Between 2000 and 2005, they spent a massive $1.9 billion. Yet in 2005, only about $72 million went to protecting critical levees. Meanwhile, a staggering $748 million was spent on an underutilized canal project after what were called Herculean lobbying efforts, a decision experts apparently knew at the time was a waste.
Exactly. Those examples really bring home the concern that earmarks can lead to resources being funneled maybe to lower priority projects because of lobbying influence, rather than what's most critical for the public good. The core conservative desire, then, often boils down to wanting a smaller, more limited federal government. The argument is pretty straightforward. Reduce the government's scope, reduce the sheer number of laws it makes, and you inherently lessen both the incentives and the opportunities for intense lobbying. Think about Microsoft, apparently. They only had one lobbyist until the government tried to break them up. Now they have many more. The principle seems to be less government means less to lobby about and less chance for undue influence.
Right. And what about campaign donations? That's often linked with lobbying. While it can involve donations, some conservatives argue against restricting the right of organizations to donate money to candidates. They see it as a legitimate way to support politicians who align with their views, their mission, suggesting maybe instead of limiting donations, we should focus on reforms that reduce the massive cost of running for elections in the first place. It's all about enabling organizations to have their voices heard and support representatives within the political process.
Indeed. Okay, now let's turn to the practical fallout, the real-world consequences of all these policy shifts and investigations. The impact on nonprofits and the world of philanthropy is, well, quite significant. These actions have created serious financial strain for a huge number of nonprofits. Many of them are heavily reliant on federal grants just to keep their doors open. Reports indicate a truly alarming trend. At least 14,000 to 23,000 documented full-time nonprofit jobs have been eliminated across the country since Inauguration Day.
Wow, that's a staggering number of jobs. Real people, real services. To put that in perspective, Save the Children, a huge global organization, lost $300 million in federal funding, just like that. And Jumpstart, an early education nonprofit, saw its funding from AmeriCorps cut literally in half. There was an analysis showing over 84% of Bronx-based nonprofits relying on government grants would be at serious risk of not even covering their expenses. This isn't just about the organization struggling. It translates directly into a disappearing safety net that could deepen poverty, deepen vulnerability in communities that depend heavily on these federal programs. It really paints a picture of intense pressure, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And it creates this highly challenging, politicized environment, too. Critics argue these new orders effectively inject politics into federal grant decisions, unquote, giving political appointees significant power to ensure grants advance presidential priorities. This could, in turn, lead to what many are calling political litmus tests for getting funding. As a result, nonprofits are expressing real fear of retaliation, loss of funding. Is causing many to stay quiet on critical issues they'd normally advocate for. There's a widely noted chilling effect on advocacy. House Democrats, for their part, have called Republican-led hearings on grant misuse political theater, aimed, they say, at silencing organizations that challenge Republican power.
And it's not just Democrats pushing back, right? Progressives criticize the anti-DEI orders as being too vague. They argue they attack a concept, diversity, equity, and inclusion, without a clear legal definition, posing what they call an existential threat to groups serving marginalized communities. However, conservatives counter that. They argue race-based grant-making is already illegal discrimination under existing law, and the administration is simply enforcing that law. This creates an incredibly difficult legal and operational landscape for so many groups caught right in the middle.
That tension is just undeniable. The strategic ambiguity, as some call it, of these executive orders has, pretty predictably, led to an avalanche of litigation. Lawsuits against the administration by nonprofits, by advocacy groups. In fact, a federal judge has already stepped in to block some federal grant freezes, which signals the immediate legal complexities, the pushback the administration is facing. This forces nonprofits to fundamentally rethink their fundraising strategies, develop contingency budgets really quickly, and often seek pro bono legal help just to navigate this turbulent new environment.
So with all this federal funding uncertainty, what's been the response from the world of philanthropy, foundations, big donors? Well, in a pretty significant shift, many foundations are actually increasing their giving. They're offering emergency funds, urging donors to be braver with contributions to try and fill these emerging gaps. We've seen reports of over 70 foundations pledging to increase giving. The MacArthur Foundation, for instance, increased its giving for 2 years, specifically citing the crisis. Even the Gates Foundation changed its scholarship eligibility rules, making them open to all races after an anti-DEI complaint. They're adjusting to the new landscape. This suggests a really significant pivot point. If federal funding is stepping back, is private philanthropy now being called upon to become a more maybe political gap-filling entity?
It really is a critical moment. This shift means philanthropy is increasingly being asked to fill gaps left by federal withdrawal, particularly in crucial areas like climate action, public health, international aid, places where federal money was often key. Which raises an important question for you listening. Is this a sustainable model for communities that used to rely on federal support? Or are we maybe looking at more of a temporary stopgap, a kind of Band-Aid solution that might not fully address the long-term needs of these vital organizations and the people they serve?
So to recap, we've explored the administration's aggressive push for accountability in federal grant spending, targeting what it sees as politically charged or, well, wasteful uses of taxpayer money. We've also examined the nuanced conservative perspective on lobbying itself, distinguishing between legitimate advocacy as free speech and concerning instances of potential corruption. And finally, we've looked at the significant real-world impact these actions are having on the nonprofit sector, leading to job losses, a scramble for new funding from philanthropic sources.
Yeah, this deep dive really highlights a critical tension, doesn't it? How do we ensure taxpayer dollars are spent wisely, legally, maybe in line with specific federal priorities, while also preserving the vital role of diverse nonprofit organizations in a free society? It raises an important question for you, our listener, to think about. What is the right balance between robust government oversight and the freedom for civil society to advocate on issues it believes are critical without facing, political retaliation or financial collapse? Something to mull over.